Superman screamed, and no one came to save him. Not because no one heard, but because in this universe, even hope is hunted. The moment he entered Warhammer 40,000, he stopped being a god, and became prey. He did not remember the moment the sky tore open, only the sound, a low, impossible groan, like reality itself resisting something it was never meant to contain. Then there was falling, endless falling, not through air but through something thicker, something alive. A void that pulsed and whispered in voices he could not understand, yet somehow felt crawl beneath his skin like a disease. And when he finally emerged, when his body tore free from that suffocating nothingness, he crashed into a sky that felt dead, a sky that did not shine but bled, where the light of a distant star offered no warmth, no strength, only a dull, sickening pressure that pressed against him like unseen hands trying to drag him back into the abyss he had just escaped. And for the first time since he was a child, since he first discovered what he was, Superman felt weak. Not physically, his body still carried unimaginable power, but something deeper. Something fundamental, something that had always been constant, was gone. The silent reassurance that the universe, no matter how broken, could still be saved. And as he hovered above the shattered landscape below, a wasteland of rusted metal, broken cathedrals, and endless machinery that stretched to the horizon like the bones of a dead civilization, he realized that this place, this universe, was not broken, it was functioning exactly as it was meant to, and that terrified him more than any enemy he had ever faced, because it meant there was no villain to defeat, no singular force to overcome, only an endless system of suffering that fed itself, that thrived on despair. And as he descended slowly, his boots touching the cold ash-covered ground, the air itself seemed to recoil from him, thick with the scent of oil, blood, and something far worse, something ancient and rotten that clung to every breath he took. And in the distance, he could hear them, not voices, not exactly, but prayers, thousands of them, whispered, screamed, chanted in unison, a desperate chorus directed towards something unseen, something vast and indifferent. And he followed the sound, his senses stretching outward, expecting to find survivors, people in need of help, because that was who he was, that was what he did. But what he found instead made him stop, truly stop, his body freezing as if even his instincts were unsure how to respond, because before him stood a massive structure, a cathedral built not for worship but for control, its walls covered in skulls, its towers piercing the dead sky like accusations, and gathered before it were thousands of figures, men, women, children, all kneeling, all broken, their bodies scarred, augmented with crude machinery, their eyes hollow as they chanted the same words over and over again, words he did not understand but felt in the way they twisted the air, in the way they carried something heavy and suffocating. And at the center of it all, raised high above the crowd, was a figure bound in metal and wires, barely human anymore. Its body fused with the machinery that surrounded it, its mouth open in a silent scream as devices drilled into its skull, extracting something Data thought, maybe even its very soul. And Superman stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, the way it always was when he faced fear, when he brought hope. "Stop this," he said, expecting them to turn, to see him, to recognize that something was wrong, that this was not how things should be. But they did not stop, they did not even acknowledge him, their chants, growing louder, more desperate, as if his presence was an intrusion, an error that needed to be corrected. And then he felt it, a shift in the air, a presence far beyond the physical, something vast and watching, something that had noticed him, and for the first time, a chill ran through him, not the kind caused by cold or fear, but something deeper, something existential, as if he had stepped into a place where he was not supposed to exist, where his very nature was an offense. And the sky darkened not with clouds, but with something moving beneath reality itself, shapes that twisted and coiled just beyond perception. And suddenly the chanting stopped, all at once, a deafening silence, replacing the endless noise, and every head turned toward him, every hollow eye locking onto his, not with hope, not with relief, but with something far worse, recognition, not of who he was, but of what he represented, something alien, something dangerous. And one of them stood, its body trembling, its voice breaking as it spoke in a language he could not understand, yet somehow did it. "Does not belong," it said, and the others repeated it, louder, stronger. "It does not belong." And Superman felt it again, that pressure, that unseen force pressing down on him, testing him, probing him, as if trying to understand what he was. And then the figure on the machine screamed, not silently this time, but loudly, violently, its voice tearing through the air as something surged through it, something dark and unnatural, and its head snapped toward Superman. its eyes glowing with a light that was not light at all, and in that moment, he understood, not through knowledge but through instinct, that whatever this place was, whatever ruled it, it had seen him, and it was not impressed. And as the sky above split open once more, revealing a glimpse of something vast and writhing beyond, something that should not exist, Superman realized a truth that hit harder than any blow he had ever taken. This was not a world that needed saving. This was a world that would try to consume him, and for the first time since he became a symbol of hope, since he became something more than human, he felt something he had not felt in a very, very long time. Uncertainty, not about his strength, not about his purpose, but about whether either of those things mattered here at all. Because in this universe, strength did not guarantee victory, and hope was not a weapon, it was a weakness, and something in the darkness had just begun to notice it. He had faced fear before, had stared into the void of space and the wrath of beings who could tear galaxies apart. But this was not fear as he understood it. This was something older, something that did not simply threaten the body but reached deeper, probing the mind, the soul, if such a thing could even exist in a universe like this. And as Superman stood beneath that torn sky, watching the impossible shapes coil and twist beyond reality itself, he felt the weight of being watched, not by one presence, but by many, vast and incomprehensible, each one pressing against existence like predators circling wounded prey. And then the screaming began again, louder now, more desperate, as the figure bound within the machine convulsed violently, its body bending in ways that should not have been possible, metal and flesh grinding together as if something inside it was trying to escape. And before Superman could move, before he could intervene, the thing's chest split open, not with blood, but with light, a sickly, shifting light that flickered with colors that did not belong to this universe. And from within it came a voice, layered and endless, whispering and roaring all at once, speaking in tones that carried meaning beyond language, and though he could not understand the words, he understood the intent. It was calling to him, not as a friend, not even as an enemy, but as something curious, something intrigued, like a child discovering a new insect to dissect. And the crowd fell prostrate once more, their faces pressed into the ash as they chanted louder than ever, their devotion now tinged with terror, as if they too felt that something had answered, something far worse than what they had been praying to. And Superman moved then, instinct taking over as he stepped forward, his eyes narrowing, his voice firm despite the pressure building around him. "Whatever you are, stop," he said, the words carrying the weight of someone who had commanded gods before, someone who had never needed to doubt his authority. But here his voice felt smaller, diminished, swallowed by the vastness pressing in from all sides. And the thing inside the machine laughed, not a sound, but a sensation, a ripple that passed through reality itself, distorting the air, bending the light, and suddenly the ground beneath him shifted, not physically, but conceptually, as if the idea of ground had changed. And for a brief, horrifying moment, he was no longer standing on solid earth but on something soft, something that pulsed beneath his feet like living flesh. And he recoiled instantly, rising into the air, but even flight felt wrong, as if gravity itself had lost meaning, as if up and down were merely suggestions in a place where the laws of physics were optional. And then it happened. The sky above didn't just tear, it opened fully, revealing a glimpse of the warp, the true nightmare that lay beneath. This universe, a realm of pure emotion and madness, where thought became reality and reality was shaped by the darkest impulses of sentient life. And through that opening, something reached out, not physically, but psychically, brushing against his mind like a cold hand. And for the first time, Superman felt pain that had nothing to do with his body, a sharp, invasive pressure that pushed into his thoughts, his memories, dragging them to the surface, exposing them, dissecting them with cruel curiosity. And he saw flashes: his home, his parents, the bright yellow sun of Earth, the symbol on his chest, everything that made him who he wasn't. Then those images began to twist, to corrupt, his symbol cracking and bleeding, his memories of hope turning into visions of failure, of worlds he could not save, people he could not protect. And he clenched his fists, his entire body tensing as he fought back, forcing those thoughts away, refusing to let whatever this was take control. And for a moment, it worked, the pressure easing slightly as he pushed against it with sheer willpower. But then the voice returned, clearer now, more focused, no longer a chaotic chorus but something deliberate, something intelligent. "You are wrong," it said, the words forming directly in his mind, bypassing sound entirely. And he gritted his teeth, his eyes glowing faintly as he responded, not aloud, but in kind, his thoughts projecting outward with the same force he used to move mountains. "I'm not the one tearing people apart," he shot back, his defiance unwavering even as the very fabric of reality buckled around him, and for a brief moment, there was silence, a pause that felt almost like consideration, before the response came, colder this time, sharper, "No, you are worse," and suddenly, the pressure intensified, slamming into him like a tidal wave, forcing him downward, his body crashing into the warped ground below as the sky above churned violently, and he tried to rise, tried to push back, but something was holding him, not physically, but fundamentally, as if the universe itself was rejecting him, and the voice continued, now laced with something that almost resembled amusement, "You bring hope into a place that feeds on despair. Do you not understand what that makes you?" And before he could answer, before he could even process the question, the figure on the machine exploded not in fire, but in raw psychic energy, a shockwave of pure emotion that ripped through the crowd, tearing their minds apart as they screamed, their bodies collapsing as their thoughts were consumed, and Superman felt it too, that wave slamming into him, carrying with it echoes of agony, hatred, fear, emotions, so intense they felt like physical blows, and for a split second, his focus broke, his control slipping as the sheer weight of it threatened to overwhelm him, and in that moment of weakness, something slipped through, something small compared to the vast presence watching him, but no less dangerous, a fragment of the warp itself, latching onto his mind, digging into the cracks that had formed under the pressure, and he gasped not from lack of air, but from the sudden intrusion, the foreign presence that began to whisper to him, not in grand cosmic declarations, but in quiet, insidious suggestions, twisting his thoughts, questioning his purpose, planting seeds of doubt where none had existed before, and he staggered, rising unsteadily as his vision blurred, the world around him shifting between reality and something far worse, and in the distance, he could see them now, shapes moving within the tear in the sky, massive, indistinct forms that radiated power and malice in equal measure, watching him, waiting, and he understood then, with a clarity that cut through the chaos, that this was only the beginning, that whatever had noticed him was not done, not even close, and as the whispers grew louder, as the darkness pressed in from all sides, Superman realized something that sent a cold, unfamiliar dread through his mind. In this universe, the greatest threat was not something he could fight with strength alone. It was something that could turn that strength against him. There was no silence anymore, no moment of stillness where he could gather himself, because the whispers had learned him now, had tasted the shape of his thoughts and found them intoxicating, and as Superman rose unsteadily from the fractured ground, his body still radiating power that could shatter worlds, he realized with growing dread that the true battlefield was no longer the ruined landscape around him, but the space within his own mind, a place that had always been his refuge, his certainty, now invaded by something patient, something infinitely cruel, something that did not rush or rage but instead unfolded slowly, like a sickness spreading through the blood, and the sky above pulsed in response, the massive tear into the warp widening just enough to let more of that impossible presence seep through, not fully, never fully, because even a fraction was enough to warp reality into something unrecognizable, and in that shifting, breathing darkness, shapes began to take form, not solid, not fixed, but suggestive, like shadows cast by something far larger just out of sight, and each one carried a different weight, a different pressure that pressed against him in distinct ways. One burning with rage so intense it felt like standing inside a star, another whispering promises wrapped in silk and poison, another radiating decay, the slow inevitability of everything ending, and another that did not feel like anything he could name, only that it was watching him with a kind of amused fascination, as if he were a story it was eager to see unfold, and though he did not know their names, could not comprehend the full scope of what they were, he understood instinctively that these were not mere entities, not creatures to be fought or defeated, but concepts given form, gods born not from creation but from emotion itself, the dark reflection of every fear, every desire, every hatred that had ever existed in this broken galaxy, and they had noticed him, truly noticed him now, not as an anomaly to be dismissed, but as something interesting, and that realization struck harder than any physical blow, because it meant this was no longer about survival, it was about attention. And in a universe like this, attention from such beings was the worst fate imaginable, and the whispers inside his mind grew clearer, more distinct, each voice separating from the others, circling him, probing him, testing the edges of his will, and one of them sharp insistent latched onto a memory, pulling it forward with brutal force, and suddenly he was no longer standing in the ruins of this dead world, but back on Earth, back under a bright yellow sun, hearing the distant cries of people in danger, feeling the familiar surge of purpose as he moved to save them. But something was wrong. The cries did not stop. They multiplied, growing louder, more desperate, overlapping until they became a deafening roar. And when he arrived, when he saw the people he was meant to save, they were already dead, their bodies broken, their eyes staring at him with silent accusation. And more kept appearing, more and more, an endless tide of failure, of moments where he was not fast enough, not strong enough, not enough, and he shook his head violently, forcing himself back into reality, his chest rising and falling as if he needed air, though he did not, and the voice returned, softer now, almost sympathetic. "You cannot save them all," it whispered, the words slipping into his thoughts with terrifying ease, and he clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he pushed back. "I don't have to save everyone, just as many as I can," he thought, his defiance still there, still burning, but it flickered now, weaker than before, and the voice seemed to smile at that, not mocking, but pleased, as if this was exactly what it had been waiting for. And then another voice cut in, deeper, heavier, carrying the weight of inevitability. "And when you fail?" it asked, and the world around him shifted again, the ground beneath his feet turning to ash that crumbled with every step, the air thickening with the stench of decay. And he saw it then, a version of this galaxy as it truly was. Not the small fragment he had witnessed before, but the full, horrifying scale of it. Endless war, endless suffering, planets burning, entire civilizations crushed beneath the weight of their own despair. And at the center of it all, a single, broken figure bound to a throne of unimaginable size, its body barely alive, sustained only by machines and the devotion of trillions. And though he did not know the name, did not understand the history, he felt the significance of it, the sheer crushing weight of what it represented. And the voice continued, "This is what your hope would face, every moment, forever." And for the first time, a crack formed in his resolve. Not a break, not yet, but a fracture, a single doubt that spread outward like a spiderweb. Because this was not like Earth, not like any world he had ever protected. This was not a place where things could be fixed, where a single act of heroism could turn the tide. This was a system built on suffering, sustained by it. And the whispers seized on that doubt instantly, pressing harder, pushing deeper, and suddenly his own power turned against him, his senses, once his greatest strength, now flooding him with too much information, too many voices, too many cries for help. Billions upon billions of them, all at once, all screaming into his mind, and he staggered, his hands rising to his head as if he could physically block it out. But there was no escape, no distance he could put between himself and the suffering of this galaxy, because here, everything was connected through the warp, every emotion, every thought feeding into that endless storm, and he was caught in it, fully exposed. And the voices grew louder, overlapping, merging into a single, overwhelming command. "Save them," they whispered. And he tried, he truly tried, his body lifting into the air, his eyes burning with energy as he prepared to move, to act, to do what he had always done. But he froze, because where would he even begin? How could he choose? How could he decide which world, which life, which moment mattered more? And the hesitation, that single moment of uncertainty, was all it took. Because the whispers shifted instantly, their tone changing from urging to accusation. "You hesitate," they said, and the words cut deeper than any blade. Because they were true, and in that truth, something inside him faltered, his identity, his purpose, the unshakable belief that had always guided him, and the presence in the sky reacted to that, the shapes within the warp becoming more defined, more focused, as if leaning closer, as if watching a critical moment in a story. And then, for the first time since he arrived in this nightmare, Superman did something he had never done before. He closed his eyes, not in calm, not in control, but in an attempt to shut everything out, to find some fragment of himself that was still untouched by this place. And for a brief, fragile moment, there was darkness, a quiet that felt almost like relief, but it did not last, because even there, even in that self-made void, the whispers followed, softer now, more intimate, no longer attacking but comforting. "You don't have to carry this," they murmured. "You don't have to be their savior." And the terrifying part, the part that truly began to break him, was that for the first time he wanted to believe them. The silence he tried to create inside his own mind did not hold. It never could, because this was not a universe where silence existed, not truly. And as Superman opened his eyes again, the world did not return to how it was before. It returned changed, as if something fundamental had shifted while his guard was down. And for a brief, disorienting moment, everything seemed clearer, sharper, more defined than ever before. every grain of ash suspended in the air, every distant scream echoing across the broken horizon, every heartbeat of every living thing within miles pulsing against his senses with unbearable intensity. And at first it felt like control, like clarity, like he had pushed back the chaos and reclaimed himself. But that illusion shattered the moment he moved, because the ground beneath him cracked not from the force of his strength, but from something else, something misaligned, as if his very presence was beginning to distort reality in subtle, dangerous ways. And he froze, looking down at his hands, watching as faint, flickering traces of something dark moved across his skin, not visible in a normal sense but felt like a second layer beneath the surface, something that did not belong to him yet had begun to root itself within him. And the whispers returned, not as an overwhelming storm this time, but as quiet, guiding thoughts, slipping into the spaces between his own. "You see more clearly now," they said, their tone almost reassuring, almost kind. And that was what made it so much worse, because part of him agreed. His senses were no longer just detecting the physical world, they were reaching beyond it, brushing against the warp itself, touching the currents of emotion and thought that flowed through this galaxy like a second reality. And he could feel it all, the fear, the rage, the despair, but also something else, something seductive, a sense of possibility, of power that went beyond his already unimaginable strength. And he pulled back instinctively, his fists clenching as he forced himself to focus, to ground himself in what he knew was real. But even that was becoming uncertain, because the line between reality and the warp was thinning around him, reacting to him, responding to his presence in ways he did not understand. And, in the distance, movement caught his attention, figures emerging from the ruins, armored, massive, their forms encased in thick, brutal plating, adorned with symbols he did not recognize but instinctively distrusted. And they moved with purpose, with discipline, weapons raised as they approached, their red lenses locking onto him with cold precision. And though he had never seen them before, he knew what they were, in the same instinctive way he had understood the horror of this universe from the moment he arrived. They were warriors, not heroes, not protectors, but instruments of something far larger and far more ruthless. And one of them stepped forward, its voice amplified through its helmet, harsh and absolute, unidentified entity. "You will submit for immediate purification," it declared, the words carrying no malice, no hatred, only certainty. And Superman hovered there, staring at them, trying to process the situation, trying to find a way to de-escalate. Because despite everything that had happened, despite the whispers and the pressure and the creeping darkness inside him, he was still himself, still someone who believed that violence was the last resort. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice steady, controlled. But even as the words left his mouth, he could feel the subtle distortion around them. The way the air seemed to ripple unnaturally, as if reality itself was reacting to his voice in ways it shouldn't. And the soldiers did not hesitate, did not question, their weapons charging with a low, ominous hum. And in that moment, he realized something critical, something that sent sharp, cold realization through his mind. They weren't here to understand him, they were here to destroy him. And the whispers seized on that instantly, their tone shifting, becoming sharper, more insistent. "They will not stop," they murmured. "They cannot stop. But you can." And the suggestion hung there, simple, direct, and for the first time, he did not reject it immediately, because he could see it now, could feel the intent behind those armored figures, the absolute conviction that he was something to be eradicated. And as the first shot rang out, a blast of energy tearing through the air toward him, his body reacted on instinct, moving faster than thought, faster than light itself. And the blast missed, striking the ground behind him in an explosion of ash and fire. And in that instant, something inside him shifted, not fully, not completely, but enough for the whispers to slip deeper, to wrap themselves around his instincts, his reactions. And the next time he moved, it was not just to evade, it was to act, his hands snapping forward, catching the weapon of the nearest soldier with effortless strength, crushing it like it was nothing. And for a split second, there was still restraint in his movement, still control. But then the soldier reacted, lunging forward with surprising speed, a blade igniting in its hand. And the moment stretched, slowed, his enhanced perception stretching it into something almost surreal. And in that stretched moment, the whispers spoke again, louder now, clearer. "They will kill you," they said, "they will kill others, unless you stop them." And the logic was simple, undeniable. The kind of reasoning he had used countless times before. But here, in this place, under this pressure, with this influence creeping into his mind, it twisted just enough to become something else, something darker. And his grip tightened, just slightly. just enough. And then it happened, so fast, so effortless, that for a moment he didn't even realize what he had done. The soldier's body crumpled in his grasp, the reinforced armor collapsing inward as if it were made of paper. And when he released it, it fell to the ground in a broken heap, unnaturally still, and everything stopped. The other soldiers freezing for just a fraction of a second, the world itself seeming to pause as if acknowledging what had just occurred. And Superman stared at his hand, at the place where the life had ended so easily, so quickly, and a wave of something hit him, not physical, not even emotional in the way he understood it, but something deeper, something wrong, because this was not how it was supposed to be. This was not who he was, and yet, it had felt effortless, natural even, and the whispers surged in response. Not overwhelming, not chaotic, but pleased, deeply, disturbingly pleased. Necessary, they said, their tone almost approving, and the remaining soldiers opened fire all at once, snapping the moment apart, forcing him back into motion as instinct took over again. But now something had changed, something fundamental, because the line had been crossed, and as he moved, as he fought, as he deflected blasts and shattered weapons, there was a difference in his actions, a subtle but undeniable shift, less hesitation, less restraint, and deep within, buried beneath layers of confusion and denial, a terrifying realization began to form, that the hardest part had not been doing it. The hardest part had been resisting it, and now that resistance was weaker than ever, and above him, beyond the torn sky, the watching presence seemed to lean closer, its attention sharpening, its interest growing, because this was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment the symbol of hope took his first step toward becoming something else entirely. The whispers had become a constant, a thread weaving themselves through every thought, every instinct, every fiber of his being, and Superman felt their pull. Subtle at first, almost a suggestion, then stronger, insistent, a tide rising that he could no longer resist, because here, in this Warhammer 40,000, power itself was malleable, and his power the strength that had always defined him. The light that had always been his shield was no longer purely his, but a conduit for something else, something older, crueler, something that had been waiting for him from the moment he arrived. And the sky above pulsed with the impossible shapes of the warp, now fully formed into massive, undulating forms, their very presence bending reality as if the universe itself acknowledged them as lords. And the ground beneath him twisted in response, alive in ways he could feel more than see, as if the land itself was sentient, shaping itself to the whims of those watching. And with each heartbeat he felt the corruption creep further, not physically, not immediately visible, but psychological, spiritual, subtle in its brilliance, infiltrating his moral compass, whispering that the universe did not care about his ideals, that it had no use for hope, that it fed on despair and dominance, and the soldiers he had fought before were no longer obstacles but instruments, extensions of the system, of the grand cruelty that watched him now. And as he moved through the battlefield, deflecting energy blasts and collapsing weapons with effortless precision, he felt the line blur between right and wrong, because here, in this place, restraint was weakness, hesitation deadly, and with every action the whispers approved, their tone laced with praise, seductive, almost comforting. Use it, your power is ours to wield, they murmured, and the thought twisted into something he could not entirely reject. Not yet, and the first soldier who had dared rise against him was gone before he even touched him. Not by his will, not consciously, but by the subtle bending of the laws around him. A psychic push that ended life instantly, and he felt it, the thrill, the taste of absolute authority over a reality that had always been indifferent, the intoxicating pull of domination, and it terrified him, because he knew it was wrong. He had always known it, but the universe whispered back, and for the first time, he questioned whether his morality had any meaning here, whether the ideals he carried from Earth were valid in a cosmos built on suffering. And in the distance, he saw a figure, massive, writhing with power, its form indistinct but impossibly vast, a chaos god, or perhaps a fragment, its presence pressing on him like a weight that could crush mountains. And the whispers urged him forward, confront it, use them, they said, and as he rose toward the towering entity, the crowd of kneeling humans and cybernetic hybrids below scattered, their prayers meaningless, their devotion insufficient to matter. And he realized that every instinct, every moral compass, every definition of heroism was being challenged, because here, strength was everything, and morality was optional, and he felt himself teetering, the edge closer than ever before, his eyes glowing brighter than normal. A halo of power laced with something darker, something creeping through his very essence, shaping his thoughts, shaping his perception, warping his understanding of right and wrong. And as he faced the colossal being, the warp itself bending and coiling behind it, he could feel the immense psychic weight pressing into him, a flood of emotion, hate, despair, rage, ambition he could not ignore, and the whispers became a chorus, louder now, insistent, guiding his actions, sharpening his instincts. Their voice no longer just suggestion but command. You are meant to lead, to dominate, to conquer. And his heart raced with the paradox of resistance and temptation, because he could feel the potential, the raw, unimaginable potential of what he could do here if he abandoned restraint, if he let the whispers shape his decisions, if he let the corruption fully into his mind. And for the first time since leaving Earth, he understood fear not for himself, not for failure, but for the world he was meant to protect, because he could become the very force of destruction that this universe craved, the living embodiment of power unrestrained. And as he hovered there, facing the towering warp entity, he realized the terrifying truth. He could not defeat it by hope, by morals, by ideals, by the way he had always fought before. And the whispers pressed harder. You are not here to save. You are here to rule, to reshape, to become. And for a fleeting, horrifying moment, he felt the temptation, the draw of relinquishing all restraint, embracing the darkness, using his powers not to defend but to dominate, to mold this universe to his will. And it was so easy, so intoxicating, that his chest tightened, his eyes glowed, and the line between hero and tyrant blurred, because in this universe, even Superman could be corrupted, and the whispers knew it, and the chaos entity before him watched, aware, patient, waiting. And he realized with dread that this confrontation was not just physical, it was existential, psychological, spiritual, the kind of conflict where victory did not mean survival, it meant who he would become. And in that split second of recognition, he flinched, the idea of his former ideals slipping like sand through his fingers, and the universe waited, holding its breath, as the man who had always been the symbol of hope now stared into the abyss, and the abyss stared back with a voice he could not ignore. And he felt the pull stronger than ever, the temptation to let go, to wield his unimaginable strength without limits, to embrace the power that this universe offered. And deep inside, a small, terrified part of him whispered, "No, this isn't me." But it was weaker, buried beneath the allure of dominance, the intoxicating promise of control. And the warp above churned alive, aware, responsive. And for the first time, he understood fully what the whispers had been preparing him for. Here, strength alone could make you god or monster, and he was standing on the knife edge of both. The sky above had fully torn open, revealing not stars, not light, but a seething, living storm of the warp, churning with impossible colors, impossible shapes, shapes that defied the mind and twisted perception. And Superman hovered at the edge of that abyss, every muscle tensed, every nerve alight, feeling the pull of a power greater than anything he had ever known. And the whispers, now a deafening chorus, filled every corner of his mind, urging, coaxing, tempting, let go, embrace it, become what this universe demands. And the temptation was exquisite, intoxicating, a siren song for someone used to being absolute, to bending worlds to his will. But he was no longer absolute here, no longer unchallenged, no longer in a universe that recognized hope as a force to be reckoned with. And for a brief, fleeting instant, he let himself imagine what could happen if he'd surrendered, if he allowed the warp to merge with his strength, his speed, his vision, his very essence. And the idea thrilled him, terrified him, exhilarated him. And yet a fragment of his old self clung on, a memory of Earth, of Lois, of the ideals he had always carried, whispering, "No, this is not who you are." But it was fading, weak against the roar of a universe that demanded more than hope, demanded dominance, demanded submission to its horrifying logic. And below him, the battlefield had transformed, no longer a field of ruins, no longer even recognizably terrestrial, but a chaotic reflection of the warp itself, rivers of fire and acid, towers of bone and machine, screaming faces emerging from the ground as if the suffering of billions had been compressed into the terrain. And he could hear them all, feel them all, their despair, their fear, their anger, their devotion. And it overwhelmed him, feeding into the whispers, feeding into the pull. And he knew then, with an instinctual certainty, that he could not leave, could not ignore it, could not remain untouched, because this universe would consume him if he tried. And the warp entity, massive beyond comprehension, coiled and shifted above him, its form a question, its intent unfathomable. And Superman felt something he had never felt, true fear, not for his life, but for his soul, for the very essence of who he was, for the line he had always walked between hero and god, and he hesitated, the tiniest pause. But it was enough, because in that hesitation the entity reached out not physically, but psychically, an invasive presence that pressed into him, bending his perceptions, twisting his instincts, showing him visions of what could be if he let go, if he embraced the darkness fully, if he allowed the power to dominate without morality. And he saw himself, not as a savior, not as a protector, but as a god of war, a figure of horror and awe, crushing worlds, commanding legions, shaping reality itself with effortless force. And the whispers reinforced the vision, painting it as inevitable, as natural, as necessary. This is your destiny. They intoned, you are the apex, the ultimate force, the necessary end. And he recoiled instinctively, but the vision remained, vivid, tangible. And for the first time, he realized the cost of resisting, the true weight of his ideals, that in this place, clinging to morality might leave him powerless, vulnerable, broken. And the warp entity seemed to notice that flicker of doubt, coiling tighter, focusing more sharply, the air itself pulsing with its attention. And below, the remnants of the soldiers and civilians watched, or perhaps sensed, or perhaps were irrelevant, mere threads in the tapestry of the universe, insignificant compared to the cosmic scale of what was occurring. And Superman's chest heaved, his heart and mind battling simultaneously, reason and instinct and temptation clashing violently within him. And then the whispers changed again, no longer suggesting, no longer tempting, now commanding with the weight of inevitability. Do it. End this hesitation. Be what you must be, or be consumed. And the pull was absolute, irresistible, a gravitational force on the soul, bending him toward a choice that had no right answer, no safe option, only consequence, only transformation. And as he hovered there, the light in his eyes flickered between brilliance and shadow, the symbol on his chest distorted subtly as if reflecting the corruption creeping within. And then the entity itself shifted, breaking the psychic distance, a tendril of pure warped energy snaking out to him, brushing against his mind, testing, probing, forcing him to confront every instinct, every fear, every desire he had ever had. And he screamed out with his voice, but internally, his mind rebelling against the invasion, struggling to hold on to what he was, to cling to the ideals that had defined him for so long. And for a moment, the storm of the warp, the whispers, the visions, the pull, all of it stopped, frozen on the knife edge of decision. And Superman understood the moment clearly. One action, one choice, could define him irrevocably, could turn him into savior or destroyer, could allow him to resist the corruption or let it consume him entirely. And the universe itself seemed to lean forward, watching, waiting, the air crackling with anticipation. And in that infinitesimal moment, he made the decision, not fully conscious, not with all his mind intact, but with the instinct of survival and the flicker of hope still inside him. And he unleashed his power, not restrained, not filtered, flowing outward in an explosion of strength and light and dark energy intertwined. And the warp entity recoiled, not from defeat but recognition. And the battlefield below twisted and warped violently, screams of agony and awe mingling as reality itself reacted. And Superman felt the shift, the absolute change in himself. And though he remained Superman in some sense, some kernel of the hero he had always been, a shadow had entered him, a darkness that would never leave, a mark of the universe he had touched, a corruption mingled with his own strength. And he hovered there, catching his breath, looking down at a battlefield that was no longer purely physical but metaphysical. And he knew, with the stark, terrifying clarity of someone who has glimpsed the abyss and touched it, that in the grim darkness of this galaxy, even he, Superman, would never be the same, because in a universe built on despair, strength alone could twist even hope into horror. And the whispers, still present, still alive in the corners of his mind, promised only one thing with unwavering certainty: the story was far from over, and he was no longer merely a visitor. He was now part of the system, part of the nightmare, part of the power that ruled it. And whether hero or monster, savior or tyrant, he had stepped across the threshold, and the universe had taken note.